Hey, this is Issa Nakazawa, your host for Transmission Studio, a show featuring the independent artists and community-based organizations that make San Francisco's arts and culture scene what it is today. We are super excited to be bringing you this 3-part conversation with some local heavy hitter Bay Area journalists. And today I'm super honored on our last episode to be in conversation with the Eric Arnold. Eric has covered hip-hop locally and nationally for over 30 years. Formerly the managing editor of 4080 and the columnist for The Source, he chronicled hyphy's rise and fall. Co-curated the Oakland Museum of California's first hip-hop exhibit in 2018 and won a 2022 Northern California Emmy Award for a mini doc on Oakland's Boogaloo dance culture. He is a contributing editor for That's My Word, KQED series on the history of Bay Area hip-hop. We are super honored to have Eric in the studio with us today, so stay tuned. Eric, it's such an honor to have you in the studio with us today. Thank you for coming.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so we were just talking about it, but it's the 50th anniversary of hip hop. We all know that by now, and we were kind of just sharing some of our highlights from the celebration. I'm curious if we can get a little bit back into that conversation. Like for me, I was saying I'm really appreciating some of the more nuanced regional stories, even the CNC story here that Andy was in. Yeah. What about you? Like, what have been your highlights so far?
Oh, well, we were just talking about Blue Note, right? And yeah. I thought the Rakim and Jazzy Jeff set was amazing, and he really moved the crowd, not to, make a pun of it, but, just his engagement as an MC and just kind of, it was like the definition of what an MC should be. That's the best show that I've seen Rakim do. Yes. And then to have Jazzy Jeff on the cuts and that was just something that was just like a sublime moment. But I think some of the other things that have come up that have been really great, the Souls of Mischief, 30th anniversary of 93 Till Infinity. Yeah. And we did a story at KQED on the mural that was created in East Oakland honoring them.
Amazing.
And that's a very nuanced story. And then there's there's some other big anniversaries too, like the Invisible Scratch Pickles. It's their 30th anniversary too.
Wow. Yeah, we're in a moment right now.
People are like, how can we keep this momentum going? This is great. We should have Hip Hop 50 every year.
I know. I will say my only piece about it is that I do find American culture to be excessively nostalgic. And I think one thing that I've been seeing journalists do well is hold space for who is not here, who didn't make it. And then also, how do we continue to celebrate the now and to make sure that we're holding the intergenerational continuum open, which is why Blue Note Jazz Festival was super moving to me, to see the whole continuum from backstage to on stage, and that to me was chills for me, because I don't think we see that enough.
It was very multi-generational, and I think with the KQED That's My Word project, we've been very aware of engaging in multi-generational content. There's kind of no point in just digging up the past unless it's relevant to the now. And an example of that is talking about Cougnut from IMP, from legendary SF hardcore rap group IMP, and then we had a live event where we featured his daughter, Alien Matt Kitty, who's a current rapper.
Yeah, that's a really good example, and I was at that event, and I was really moved by the intention. As an audience member, I felt it, I experienced it. Can you tell us about the journalist side? Are there any reflections you have of maybe 50 years of journalism or some key moments that stand out to you? You have a deep career. It's you're also part of this anniversary, but from a different side. Where are we at now, 50 years later?
Well, we're in a moment, where hip hop has created its own legitimacy. And I say that because it started out as very illegitimate and couldn't get anyone's attention, and was very dismissed, and was this underground underdog thing that was created by people that couldn't get into the fancy clubs.
Yeah. What are some of the challenges with being legitimate?
Well, everyone thinks it's dead.
Ooh.
That's That's the biggest one. It's like, I don't know how many times I've seen on social media, hip hop is dead, da da da. And every time someone says that, someone points out, look, hip hop is bigger than it's ever been, especially when you think about it from a global perspective and a global context, and the fact that it's on every continent except Antarctica, and maybe even the penguins are getting down over there. But it's 20, 30, 40 years deep in some of these countries.
Yeah.
And they've all added their own thing to it. So what we're seeing in America with it maybe being mainstream and not being the way that people remember it being, that's like a false perception. I mean, because the underground is thicker than it's ever been. You look at the upcoming event with the Scratch Pickles, right? The DMC World Finals are going to be in San Francisco for the first time.
Yeah.
And people talk about like, well, turntablism, does it really even matter anymore? And yeah, it does matter. I mean, this is a global event that's centered right here in the Bay Area.
Yeah, I really like complicating that kind of purist mentality where it is afraid to, it's afraid that almost there's an inherent integrity lost when more people join in.
Right.
Which I think you're saying is BS.
Well, I've been saying if you just look at it from a cultural paradigm perspective, right? Any culture that doesn't evolve, that stays static, dies. You look at jazz, you look at blues, you look at rock and roll, you look at any of those art forms, right? And jazz is all about constant evolution. I mean, there's some purists that wanted jazz to stay in 1945 to 1955.
Right.
But it evolved, and because it evolved, it lent itself to funk, and it lent itself to hip-hop, and now it's part of the DNA of funk and hip-hop.
Absolutely. I think we're in that moment, too, with journalism, where I think of legacy journalism. I think of, like, notions of objectivity, notions of kind of, like, I was talking to Carlos and Nastia, this kind of cold remove. And now, like, what moment are we in from your perspective of what journalism looks like, its format, its energy?
I mean, there's so many opportunities for journalists, and very much non-traditional opportunities with all the platforms. So even though, like, I started out in print, doing a hip hop magazine.
Same here.
Back in the 90s, and pre-internet, and now, like, everyone can pick up their phone and be like a multimedia creator on their phone.
Right.
Which is ridiculous. And then, you apply that to journalism, and if you know how to do an interview, it's like you can be a journalist without even having to go to school to be a journalist.
And what do you think of that? Like, even I was just, I was in by Yosemite when I heard the news of OK Player firing all of its editorial staff last Thursday. And I don't know enough information to know what that's going to look like, but it was a punch to the gut in the sense of grieving, my old school self, grieving some of what that might mean. And also for me, gratitude for the foundation that it laid for me personally. But I do think, we are in a time where I think I myself need to challenge myself to get out of that thinking and to see opportunity.
But I mean, that happens. That's just part and parcel of the whole dynamic and the whole paradigm. I mean, I used to write for The Source magazine.
Oh, yeah.
And, there was like a moment where the publisher went in and just cleaned house on everybody,
Yeah.
And you just keep it moving, and you find other outlets, and you take that experience and you take it somewhere else. And when I started out doing hip hop journalism, there was no Source magazine.
Right.
When I was studying in college and doing my thesis on hip hop, there was no such thing as like a hip hop publication. So then The Source was this whole arc, and then we kind of went post-Source, even though they're still around, and that's when the OK Players kind of stepped up, and the Complexes, and so what I'm saying is, like, there's always going to be another iteration of it, as long as the culture is relevant.
I think that, that's really, thank you. I needed to hear that. Because there are moments, right, where you can't see the next step, and you just need to not overthink it. You need to trust.
Yeah, I mean, with something like OK Player, you don't really know what was going on behind those offices.
I know nothing.
And all I'll say is, like, those people are going to find homes, But it's interesting when you talk about that, and I'm just going to pivot here to a recent story that we did on Bomb Magazine.
Oh, yeah.
Because Bomb Magazine was one of the original hip-hop publications right here in SF. And its alumni include, Joseph Patel, who won an Academy Award for Summer of Soul, Jeff Chang, who, is a well-known author and teacher, and Cheo Coker, who was the showrunner for Luke Cage. DJ Shadow was a contributor, and all of them started out like writing with this photocopied zine.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, right? Like, you can't hide behind or get overly attached to one thing, right? You have to stay fluid.
I mean, you can try. I mean, but, as a writer, it's like you just got to roll with it. I mean, I used to work for 4080. I used to be the editor of 4080 magazine, and that went under.
Right.
And I mean, I left just before it went under, but it was like this thing. It was totally a thing. It was like a Bay Area phenomenon. Then all of a sudden it was gone. And that created room for Murder Dog to step up, and for Thizzler to step up, and for all these other, publications to step up. So.
No, I think that's right. I was talking to Nastia about, not the flip of this, but it's interesting. There's less gatekeeping now, even on the A&R side, right? Like, there's more openness and spaciousness for new formats. But one of the interesting things that I'll find myself craving, is how do we create these community agreements or quality control in non-traditional ways? So if we're not going to find legitimacy through, schools, degrees, like all of those things, and crack that open, how can we come to some agreements about what it looks like to have quality writing? Or do you think that that's still an unnecessary?
Oh, I mean, I'm obviously in favor of quality writing.
Yeah.
But while there are non-traditional and alternative outlets, you're also seeing a big push for education. And, things like SF State and Stanford have been leading the way. And, there's a hip hop archive in Harvard. And there are nonprofits that have programs or initiatives where they're developing hip hop curricula.
Right.
So I think the push there is to get culturally relevant material into the curricula.
Yes.
And I think that's the thing, because, you'll be more effective in terms of actual education. But yeah, I mean, not everyone has a degree. You don't necessarily need a degree. I mean, if you're not going to work in traditional media, you don't need one.
Yeah, and I think that to me is a plus. Like, that's an exciting generative space. I think there are just moments where it feels like social media creates this redundancy, or this like echo chamber of everyone, like the kind of cult of entrepreneurship where everyone can be whatever they want, which on the one side is exciting, and on the other side it gets really overwhelming. Like,
sure.
Who do you listen to, and then who gets that kind of play or attention based on some nepotistic things or power that's happening that maybe is hidden from the feed. But also, moving to another question, I think one thing I observed when I saw you at at Blue Note Jazz that I loved was the way that you didn't notice that I was observing, but the way that you were making decisions about who was going to interview which artist, and you were really encouraging the younger folks to get in there, and you were like, you're ready, like you got to take it from here, in terms of taking the leap.
Yeah.
Is that intentional for you? Like, how do you nurture, like, not maybe formal mentees, but how are you sharing your knowledge?
Well, so that was our intern, Olivia. And, this is someone that's just starting out in journalism, that's interning. And, I mean, I've interviewed hundreds of artists. So one interview to me is not going to make a huge difference. But for her, maybe that's a flashpoint. That informs her journalism career from that point onward. And then she's able to like take that and, and be like, wow, I was really inspired. I was able to do this interview. I was nervous beforehand, but it turned out great. And, I got the story.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Each one has to teach one, So, I mean, I can't just sit up there and hog all the interviews just because I've been doing it forever.
Right.
You always have to create opportunity for the young generation to come up.
Yeah, that was really beautiful to see. And I was like, I agree with Eric. You have to just dive in, because no matter how much prep, like, what's your kind of flow with interviewing? Like, what's that balance between prep and presence, or just being in the moment?
I like to prep if I can.
Yeah, for sure.
It also depends too. Like, if you're doing like a story on, a historical figure, you want to be very thorough. Like, I've been researching Bay Area mob music producers, and I just interviewed Studio Tone, who was like E40's first producer. And I went in there prepared, because you can't have any dead air. And you also have to know their catalog. You got to know their catalog. So, you go up on Discogs, you scour the internet, you write down the significant things that they did, you listen to that music. Don't just write it down, but be able to talk about drought season. What's the bass line in there? Oh, I think I hear some live keyboards and guitar. How did that all come together? And and Studio Tone, that's someone I've never talked to before. But he was appreciative that I had done my research, I had done my homework. For something like Blue Note, that was kind of like a hot mess in that we didn't necessarily have scheduled interviews.
No.
We put in our our request for, I'd like to have all these people. Then, some of the Blue Note staff didn't even show up on certain days. They're just it was too hot, or they got reassigned, or, and you're just, oh, well, I guess we're just going to have to wing it. Right. So you have to be able to do that too. And that's what covering festivals and things like that is good for, because you learn that all your preparation can go out the window. Yes,
I loved seeing you. I was watching you just go for it with Madlib, because he's always notoriously hard to interview, and then he answered. He ended up giving you an answer off the photo shoot.
Yeah, his manager was like, just call his name out
I didn't see that.
Yeah, she encouraged me. She was no. First she was no, he's not going to do any interviews, and then she was just call his name out and say something real quick.
Oh, wow, I didn't see that. We're demystifying it.
And then he actually kind of got into it and wanted to continue, and his manager was like, no, come on, and ushered him out. But at least I did get a quote from him.
Yeah, I was trying to take notes and observe you, because I didn't know that happened. I thought you were going off instinct, and...
I mean, it was a little bit of instinct. You do need to be bold and step up, and it just shows that, if you would have if I would have remained silent, I wouldn't have got that.
Have you had, absolutely, and I love the Nardwuar to flexibility pipeline here. Have you ever had a story or a moment in an interview or an artist where you had, maybe they were a hero, here's a big word, but a legend to you, or conversely, someone you really had strong negative feelings and you had to find that equilibrium within yourself, or is that something you're just pretty good at?
If you do enough interviews, you sort of lose your fear of interview.
That's true.
But also, when you interview a lot of artists, you realize that artists are regular people, and they're real. And I remember interviewing Grandmaster Flash back in the 90s, and that was a big moment for me, but it wasn't that big for him.
Oh, yeah. This isn't a huge moment for you, man?
Yeah, he wasn't that excited to be interviewed by me, but for me, it was man, this is my hero. I grew up now I'm talking to him, at 3 a.m. at this rave, and in San Leandro.
Well, one thing that I find fascinating about music journalism in particular is that a lot of musicians are choosing not nonverbal mediums, but they're choosing to express themselves through music. So language and the word, it can feel very claustrophobic and challenging for musicians to put language to music. So how have you found musicians actually as interview subjects? Because I found it to be, we actually talked about this before, but I find it to be an interesting spectrum, honestly.
Some of them don't really think about their language.
Yeah.
A good example is Robert Glasper.
Yeah, we talked about this.
Where he's a great musician, but he's probably always thinking in time signatures and musical notes. And then if you listen to his words, you kind of get what he's talking about. Yeah. But in terms of being coherent, in terms of his syntax and forming, legible sentences that look great on paper, not really so much.
Right.
But that's also a testament to how much of a musician he is.
I love that. Yeah, I'm curious if you can speak a little bit to even the difference between being a writer and reporting mode versus editing. Because I've really admired editing for a long time, because I feel like there is something, you're crafting and shaping the clay, and you're choosing what to cut, and you're kind of clarifying truth.
Well, that's what a good editor will do, will make a story more clear and look at it with an eye that is just going to find, you have to understand the perspective of the reader and the perspective of the writer.
Yeah.
What is the writer trying to say, and is that clear to the reader?
Yeah, I'm like, cats off. Is that something that gets easier over time? Like you kind of get your style?
Yeah, it does. I mean, the more you read other people's material, it makes you a better writer too. But the more you read other people's material, the more you kind of figure out what they're trying to say, and could they have said that in 50 fewer words?
What about editing in groups? Or like, what if you're an editor with like one or two other people? How is that kind of a different challenge?
A lot of times that's more like just kind of figuring out the themes. Like with the That's My Word project, there's like kind of like 4 core editors, myself, Gabe Moline, Nastia, and Pen Harshaw. And at the beginning of the project, we all just kind of sat around and talked about how we were going to approach it, what we wanted to cover, what we didn't think we could cover within the project, which would be the be-all, tell-all comprehensive history of Bay Area hip-hop from A to Z.
Yeah.
All of that in 1 year,
Yeah.
That's
very
not,
ambitious.
Yeah, and we kind of realized, well, you know what? If we kind of break it off into smaller chunks and realize that not every story has to be the be-all and end-all story, that's a really good approach.
Yeah.
And it's an engaging approach, and it's an approach that works for this format, whereas if we were doing a book, maybe there's time for 10,000 or 20,000 word pieces.
Absolutely. Are there any like artist collectives or artists or even Bay Area journalists that are really energizing you right now, like local cats, whether they're in whatever field that you feel really excited and that you're watching?
Oh, that's a tough question. I would say the most energizing thing that I have recently witnessed was actually last night when I went to Thug Thursday in Oakland. Well, so it's this meeting convened by Mr. Fab. And, he's got church leaders there. He's got nonprofit leaders there. He's got sports coaches there. He's got re-entry population people there. And it's really about all coming together to talk about what are the problems and what are the solutions. And by being in community and being in communication, we can sort of identify both.
Wow, that's really powerful to know that's happening. And of course, Mr. Fab's the convener.
And it's the same guy that, made Super Sick Witted in 2006,
yeah.
Right, or 2005. And it's great to see Fab's evolution too. And that's, getting back to this whole arc of hip hop. And, I wouldn't have seen that coming, when I wrote the Vibe feature on hyphy in 2006,
But I feel like it resonates with you, too. Like, you're someone who I've always seen zigzag and have very organic intersections between music, community, organizing. Like, they're not these separate things in our lives, right?
No, they're not. And, we probably have the Black Panthers to thank for that.
Yes.
Because they showed us that the cultural, the social, the economic, and the political are all the same thing, along with, your own identity.
Yes.
And because we have a history of kind of like those organic yet global movements that are still relevant today, it's just something in the fabric of the Bay Area.
I know, speaking of, I know we're running out of time, but I'm curious, what has stayed you committed to the Bay? You've been here a long time. What keeps you just coming back and doing your work and doing your life here?
It's the dank. No, no, I mean it's legal now. But there was a time where you'd be like, wow, Redman and Method Man have been here 8 times in the last 2 months. Why is that? In all seriousness, I think there's something very special about the Bay. I have traveled nationally, globally to some extent, and you always come back here and appreciate the Bay a little bit more. And I think it's the intersection of culture, community, and diversity.
Yeah. Wow, Eric, it was such an honor and pleasure personally to be in conversation with you. I could do this for 3 more hours. So can you just plug any projects, or where can people follow your work?
Okay, well, BayAreaHipHop.com is where we have the collected That's My Word material to date, and we're going to be going at least through the end of the year, 2023. And I have a bunch of features in there, as well as some really great work by other writers, Gabe Nastia, Tamara Palmer, Mosey Reeves, Adisa Banjoko.
Wow.
All these like great people who have like really been putting in the work. And so that's probably the most present thing. There's some other things that are kind of in the process that I can't talk about now, but hopefully 2024 is going to be a big year for your boy. Just saying.
Well, we are all in such big support. And again, thank you so much for all of the groundwork you've laid for folks like me. And yeah, it's an honor to have you on the show.
So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
And thank you so much for tuning into this episode and the whole installment on Bay Area journalism. And stay tuned for our next episode.